Welcome back to the Strong Family Project. I'm Joe, joined by Mel.
Welcome back to the Strong Family Project podcast, where we guide you on the path to raising confident, independent, and resilient children in a strong family environment.
Important episode today on creating moments with your family and exactly how to do it. A lot of this is going to be centered around the education from Chip and Dan Heath, two great authors. I don't know if they both are. One is an organizational behavioral scientist at Stanford. I've read all their books from Made to Stick, Decisive, which is another great book, Power of Moments. And I've distilled out a couple of lessons to share with you so that you can create more powerful moments with your family as they get older, regardless of age. A majority of our memorable moments happen between 18 and 30, and we typically credit them to chance. Oh, this thing happened and I'll remember it forever. However, there's a formula that Chip and Dan write about, and I'm going to share that with you today. I'm going to share some ideas with you today. Mel and I will share some moments and why they stick out in our past so we can together create some more powerful memories with our family. Mel, time to ask you a question to get into it. If I were to say, tell me something, a moment from your childhood, what would pop into your mind?
Summertime, because we always spend but it's not really a particular moment.
Yeah, I need a particular
I
moment, so
know.
don't be difficult. Don't give something vague.
It was going to be big.
See, Mel doesn't get to know the topics before we hop
I know.
on.
I've got one. Okay, so my dad used to have a motorboat that he had for a very long time, and we would go to Lake Wallenpaupack, and we bought this like rocket-looking thing, and he would pull us on it around this island. And I can remember specifically my mom would stay on the shore, my sister and I would go out onto this rocket thing, and he would pull us around, and that was a very clear and happy memory for me.
Why do you think that popped to your brain when we started talking?
I think I go right to happy moments, which I had a lot of growing up. I think that's why it went right to there. And that whenever we didn't go there often. So it wasn't something that was just like expected all the time, or we did not do it very often. And I think maybe that's part of why it sticks in my mind or came to the forefront quickly, is because it stood out amongst other things that we did all the time. So this was something that was more unusual.
And as a listener of the podcast, I'd encourage you to just pause it for a minute and think of a memory. And before we get into the 4 things that define memories that we can start creating some more with our family, it's good to have an example like I just did to Mel, so that when we go through this and we explain the 4 elements, you can apply them and see if it's true for you, which ones are true for you, and then we can more easily plan ahead some moments for our families. So let me push this a little further, Mel. So you're down at Lake Wallenpaupack on a rocket ship.
And it's fun to say
I
Wallenpaupack
say
as
a
well.
motorboat, not just a boat, motorboat.
Yes.
Well, obviously he's not rowing that
Is
fast.
that weird that I said motorboat?
Okay,
That's
so
weird. Okay. That's what we always called it, so.
was everything about that experience good? What's something that went wrong?
No. I can
Okay,
even
good.
remember like the smell of the boat,
Oh yeah, I like that gas
of the
smell. Get your
motorboat.
wow. So you smell the oars on the rowboat?
Or like it was blue and like the seats were blue, but they were worn. And I feel like now that I'm talking about it, like the more senses I can include makes it more memorable to me. I don't think anything went wrong. The only thing I could think of that would be wrong is that like we couldn't go because the weather was poor. If we had planned on going and couldn't go.
And that's a great example, because here's what we remember. And if you are taking notes, and I do recommend taking some notes, this is one of my biggest takeaways from the power of moments. We remember the best of the moment and the last part of the moment. I should say best or worst part of the moment. So the peak or the trough, and then the last. We wrongfully assume that a powerful moment is like a 10 on a scale across the board, or it's an experience where you average the score out and, oh, it was a 9 out of 10. That's not true. Some of these moments stink. I'll give you an example. I just got back from Orlando. I'm going to have some memories from this trip to Orlando. I went there to speak at a conference with a friend, Vince Gabriel, and a bunch of other great fitness business owners, and got to chat with them on building relationships with their gym members and creating moments for them. I'll remember certain things from this trip. I'll remember going on a ruck with Vince before we started and seeing an alligator for the first time in the wild. I just stared at it. I've seen them in zoos. It was cool to see it sitting there doing its alligator thing because it's so different to me. And I'm used to bears out here in the mountains. I'm used to mountain lions, but alligators are very rare to come across unless it's in a zoo here in Colorado. So I remember just seeing it and just staring at it. I'll remember a moment of pride when I vouched for someone to come in and speak. Another friend of mine, Mark, who co-owns and was the founder of Think Creative, now Think Integrated out of Orlando, a branding and marketing agency, where I knew Mark was a very smart guy. I've talked to him over the last decade. He's helped me with some company branding. He's helped me write some stories for our companies. And he's brought out some of the creative side of me. But I've never seen Mark actually give a presentation. However, I vouch for him, say, hey, I know Mark, he's going to give a great presentation. He went up on stage and delivered an amazing presentation about how these physical accomplishments he's had in triathlons and running and these challenges and events help shape how he interacts with his business and interacts with other people. And he knocked it out of the park. So I'll have that moment for that. And so when I come back, I'll say, hey, that was a good trip. I gave a talk, which went well. Mark crushed it, got to see an alligator. Now, that's the story from the trip, but I was there for 4 days, and a lot of it wasn't what I would consider ideal because that is every moment. This is not a knock on the trip whatsoever. I got out of the plane, immediately started sweating. Like I'm immediately wet. I don't know what they do with that humidity there, but it's in the middle of a swamp. If you've never been to Orlando, that they put Disney World down, and it's hot and it's wet. And I'm used to it being hot and super dry here in, this is a desert mountain condition, or what they call this climate. It's very arid. And so it was, oh man, I'm getting all sticky. I don't have enough laundry for this trip. And I'm getting sweat through my clothes. Friend Carly was there. She wanted to go for runs. I don't particularly care for running, but I enjoy hanging out with Carly and with Brian. So we went for some runs. I'm chafing. I need to put some Band-Aids on so that I'm not like chafing through my shirt, so I'm not sweating through all my clothes. We went out to eat. It is packed. I don't like big crowds. We went out to dinner a bunch of times, and very nice to be taken out to dinner, but it's just so busy and so loud. We went to one restaurant with Mark and his team. Very cool people took us out to lunch, but there's a table next to us that was so loud that I really couldn't hear. Food was great. Company was great, but I had leaning in with my ear. And so a lot of these pieces of this experience I'd rank like a 2 or 3. Some of it was a 10. We remember the best and the worst. So if I was walking through Disney Springs and it was packed and someone came up and kicked me in the crotch, I would remember that as the worst part of my trip for a long time in my life because it would stand out as the trough of the experience. Instead, that did not happen. I have memories of the peaks, seeing the alligator, seeing the pride in what Mark was able to come in and do and build connection. Very happy for him. And so we don't take this whole experience. Like in Mel's boat trip, there was probably, maybe they were hungry for a day. Maybe they got sunburnt. Maybe one person got to go and the other person didn't get to go and they got in an argument. A lot of that stuff is forgettable. And the reason why I share that is because things can go wrong in these moments. It is not a perfect 10 across the board. Your goal is to create one peak of the experience that is noticeably better than the rest. You don't want to make these experiences good. You don't want it like a 7 across the board. It's better to be like 3, 3, 3, 10. Because they'll remember the 10 because you put all of your effort and have been unreasonably proactive in creating that part of the memory. It'll make more sense when I give more examples. But Mel, does that make more sense?
It does. And that makes sense when I earlier said that particular memory stood out because it wasn't something that would happen often. So it's a 10 because it stands out among, yeah, we would go to this cabin all summer and I loved it, but I don't necessarily have as many like strong memories because we were there for 2 months out of every year, whereas Wallenpaupack was once or twice a summer. So I think it's almost like if you look at the 10, it's also something that doesn't happen often. Like the alligator's not going to happen every time you go to Orlando necessarily. So it stands out more.
Perfect. Let me give you the 4, and this is from Chip and Dan Heath, the 4 things that create a defining moment.
Wait, can I pause you?
What?
Because you said earlier that it was, you remember the best and the worst and the last.
Yes.
Are we going to talk more about that later?
later.
Oh, okay.
Let me give you the 4 so you can write them down so it's not disorganized, because sometimes we go off on tangents. Here they are, what Mel was just explaining prior to her interruption, is what's called elevation. It's something that rises above your everyday life. So if Mel lived on Lake Wallenpaupack and I went motorboating every day, not just boating, but motorboating,
Oh my gosh.
every day it would blur together. However, it wasn't every day. It was a moment of elevation. The second is called insight. These are defining moments that rewire our understanding of ourselves to the world or the world around us, where it's like a flash. Oh, wow, I didn't realize this was so different. And just briefly, and we'll go in more on this, I have moments of insight when we moved from upstate New York to the Midwest. And wow, the world is different than I understood it there. There are different aspects of how people live and do things in other areas of the country now. A lot of people who travel more may think that's normal, but that was a moment of elevation and insight because it was different from my everyday. And it rewired my understanding of that people are different within similar cultures are still very different. Moment of pride, like when I shared, I was very proud of Mark getting up there and doing such a great presentation in Orlando. I'll remember that, and I'll share some other ones later. And the last one, moments of connection. These are things like baptisms, graduations, wedding, where it's a big group get together. You could even say that is a moment of elevation too, because those are not regular occurrence. If you got married every day, they probably wouldn't feel that special. So again, the 4 are elevation, insight, pride, and connection. And the reason why I want you to write those down is and where we're going with this, is if you have an event like a graduation coming up, a birthday for one of your kids, and you can look at this list and say, how can we focus on one of these and make it different? How can we rise above what we do every day? How can we instead give a different insight or teach something about the world in this moment? How can we give them, your children, a feeling of pride in this moment? Or how can we build a special sense of connection in this moment? You put your effort in there to create a peak. It does not have to be in all of the areas. It shouldn't be in all of the areas, but it can be in one of the areas.
I have an example to share because I think this will help bring it down to everyday life almost. So the other day, I was in Henry's class in the morning, and his teacher starts the day with a circle question. All the students get in a circle in the classroom, and one student is in charge of the question of the day. And the question was, ironically, what is your most memorable birthday? And I love this because Henry was sitting next to me. He immediately looked at me and was like, which year was it that I did the pull-ups? Was I 11? Because he immediately had that memory. And it involved a lot of those things you just mentioned. Of course, he was proud of himself. So he knew immediately he was going to talk about that. But so many kids were just like, I don't know. I don't remember. Birthdays aren't that special. Like cake and presents. And it wasn't at all about, and we have talked in the past about how to celebrate birthdays in a unique way. Like for you, we did a parade, I think 2 years already. And that's really exciting and memorable, or some kind of a physical challenge. So it's not just blends in with all the other birthdays that were just cake and presents. But that really struck me that I was, of course, happy that my kid had this exciting birthday to remember. And there were several kids, of course, that had some really cool thing that they did. But it was the kids that had a really cool thing to share. It definitely was one of those. It was the one year that we basically had a family reunion on my birthday. It was something that was big and stood out. And they immediately remembered it. A lot of the kids that haven't had that experience, we had to either come back to them because they couldn't think of something, or it was something almost disappointing because it just blends into the rest.
Let's go through these and give it some more examples so people can see where we're going. Then I'm going to give you some ideas to look at your calendar and see what's coming up. And some of these are likely coming up. And then give you some small ideas where we can intentionally create these moments. Assuming that they'll just happen is a recipe for not many powerful moments. And if you don't take the time to create moments, everything blurs together. Time seems to travel faster. And these moments are like milestones in your life that you can look back in and say, this happened in this year, this happened in this year. And it creates a sense of time that you've made the most of it. And it gives you more fulfillment in your life. So these are very important to consider and do. And it's been something I've been thinking about ever since this book came out. We try to do it for our clients. at the fitness studios, try to do it for the members that I do business consulting for, to reach out and give them a little bit something different in their everyday life and build some connection and relationship with them. So we'll start with elevation, rising above the everyday. We decided I decided, I don't know if we's fair, to I decided I wanted to do birthdays differently. And there's a whole episode on celebrations and how we do it in season 1 of the Strong Family Project. I wanted to make it more memorable. I selected doing some physical accomplishments. So for my birthday, I trained, did 4,140 pull-ups on my 40th birthday. Henry saw me do that, participated, and later that year did 1,011 on his 11th birthday. And it was a really powerful moment. He remembers it. It was now getting to be a couple years ago. And on Father's Day, we did a Father's Day marathon around parks in Colorado Springs. So we went to one park, we did a few miles, we went to the next park, we did a few miles, because we wanted to discover more about the area we moved to while doing this special thing. I don't want to sit around and just have pizza and cake or burger, whatever. It's not all about food. So we create a little pattern interrupt to elevate those days above what we would think a normal day is. Do you have another example for elevation?
I think I'm stuck on birthdays now because like you had mentioned before, in New York, it's cloudy and the weather's not great. One reason we chose here was because it's sunny. Now, my birthday happens to be in January, and it's not great. And 2 years ago, we were all very sick on my birthday. But a week later, it was like 65 degrees. And we went to Palmer Park, which is another park around here, and did a hike. And for some reason, that was like a day of elevation for me. You took a picture of myself, like looking off into the distance and the kids around me. And whenever that picture pops up on Facebook, I have such like a wonderful feeling and memory from that day. And what elevated it, though, is almost appreciation and gratitude for like where we are and that the weather was nice and that we did something outside of our usual. We never would have necessarily gone for a hike on my birthday. So this was several years ago. But that sticks in my mind very strongly because it was different. And in that picture, I think sometimes a poignant picture can really bring the memory to the forefront. So that's what comes to mind for me. I'm trying to think of one for the kids. But it's almost like you have to ask the individual person because your birthday that you did the pull-up challenge, of course I remember that, but like it's much more poignant for you because it was your experience, like you were doing it. Granted, we were all cheering you on and we were a piece of it. But I think that's part of it, is it has to be poignant to the person, to the individual as well. It could be a family memory, but everyone's going to remember it differently, I think.
Great. Let's slide over to insight. I have a couple examples for insight that have happened in my life that I'll share for the sake of getting you thinking about things in your life that you remember so that we can create more of these for the family. Insight, I've got some highs and lows for insight. One happened last summer, and some of these can feel pretty mundane. Older brother came out. I don't remember if it was for my younger brother's bachelor party or my birthday party. I think it was a bachelor party. We went out to do some hikes. And after the hike, we went to an ice cream shop. And at this ice cream shop, I was my turn to get the ice cream or whatever they wanted. And so I was waiting in line and looked in front of me and looked behind me. And people were incredibly unhealthy at this ice cream store. And some people were even waiting. There's an SUV parked there. One father had to sit in the SUV because it didn't look like he was healthy enough to get out, air conditioned, blasting, too hot, too uncomfortable, send his kid up to like get him ice cream and deliver it to him in his SUV. And I thought, I don't want to live the life that these people are living currently. So why am I doing the things that they're doing, which is viewing this as like a treat, like I get to eat this thing and it's going to make me incredibly unhealthy. Now, I understand this is a bit of an extreme, but there was some insight in my life that I got to stop doing things that people who have a life that I don't want to have or don't want to lead, because I saw my father be very unhealthy and it ended up costing him his life early, that I'm just going to give up desserts. I'm never going to have another dessert again. It's been closing in on a year now where I just haven't. Done with them for life. I've had my fair share. It blows people's mind, but I just had insight in that moment. That's not what I'm going to do anymore. Another example of insight. Mel, do you have one?
I do have one.
Go ahead.
So it's related to us moving. So we went, and we've talked about this in the podcast before, but we went on this walk during 2020 when you mentioned the idea of moving, which never would have occurred to me. I never, seriously never thought about moving, or at least not realistically speaking. And when you first mentioned it, it created panic inside of me. But then a couple hours later, it got a little exciting. There's a possibility. That was my insight, was like I never allowed myself to step out of that box, so to speak, of being able to move, and that's even we could consider and do and successfully do. So that was a huge insight for me. Just it's almost like you never know what you might be exposed to, or an idea that might come into your life that all of a sudden just shines a massively bright light. And I actually mentioned to the kids the other day, I said to them, we've been here for a couple of years. I think we should celebrate the fact that we moved our entire family, knew nobody here, and have created quite like a successful, rounded community for ourselves here. But I'll never forget going on that walk, you saying those words to me about moving, totally panicking, and then a couple hours later, we're printing out a list of the states and considering this for real.
Let me give an example with the family. So in a previous episode, talked about rites of passage, very important episode in season 1, which helps create a very specific memory. And if you are looking for a starting point, the rites of passage episode for creating a moment would be a great one. During the rite of passage, I'll spare the whole story. I'll have to listen to the episode. We had the kids bring a memory from their childhood. The reason why is because I want to manufacture some insight in their lives and in this moment. One brought a little action figure, one brought like a Pokemon card, and I spoke about this in the Ben Greenfield Life podcast, and I wish I had articulated it better. The reason why I had them bring it is they either gifted or left that item at the top because it was symbolizing them moving from childhood to create this insight, moving from childhood to being a young adult. And they're giving up a piece of their childhood. Now, I want them to grow up to be childlike in terms of how they view the world and creative and just like to think and learn, but I don't want them to be childish. And I wish I did a better job explaining that on that previous podcast, but I have my opportunity now. So I don't want them to think they're going to be dependent. They're going to be reactive. They're going to be overly emotional in small situations. Those things are childish, that it was symbolizing them giving up. And then we talked about on the way down, the positive aspects, positive attributes of childhood that they should continue. And so try to get this insight by having that moment during the rite of passage so that they could come to this understanding and realization. And the little symbol helped memorialize it so they could remember it better.
Maybe an insight I'm having right now is maybe as parents, we rely too much on chance.
Yes, we do.
Like kids will just figure this out. They'll just have this experience at some point and figure that out. Instead, like we're talking about here, we almost have to manufacture moments sometimes to create that insight because we want it to get passed on and not leave it to chance. I always like to refer to it as planting seeds. Like sometimes you might give your kid an idea and it might not take, but you're still planting the seed that maybe later on you can water it another way and then eventually it might sprout. So I think we can't just leave it to chance. Plus, other people are going to plant seeds too in your kid. They're going to give their kid ideas. And if you really want your ideas to take root, you have to make sure that you are creating that in moments. And sometimes it has to be manufactured, so to speak.
Yes. I want you to purposely, intentionally create these moments. We'll give one more on insight, then we're going to go to pride. So Mel, start brainstorming on pride, moments of pride that you recall. So one last insight was somewhat of a negative situation where it wasn't a year ago, maybe 6 months ago. We're driving son Everett. We had it's a van down to the Springs. I don't remember where we're going, but we witnessed a motorcycle accident. Person missiles off into the mountain, essentially. They were speeding too fast. One car didn't get out of the fast lane as quickly as this motorcycle rider wanted, so pulled up beside to gesture to that car, and all of a sudden the road took a left, and the motorcycle did not look back forward to realize it and went straight off, right into the trees. Now, this is unbelievably the third motorcycle accident, fourth car accident that I've witnessed in the last couple years from being here. And I was going to be the first one there. And based on the previous accident that I had witnessed, I thought there's no way this person lived. They went full speed off essentially into a couple of trees in the side of a mountain. And walking up to them, I had this thought, this insight where I might be the last person this person ever speaks to or sees on this earth. I'm going to walk up, they're going to be dying. What is it that I want to impart, talk about, or listen for during this moment? Now, this person ended up having tons of Kevlar on, thankfully saved their life, was able to get up and was able to be essentially saved. The ambulance came shortly after I responded and it worked out. But I will remember that insight of, this is very serious. This is going to, I need to put some thought into this, and I only have 10 steps to decide this critical moment.
That was intense because I feel
Mel
like.
was there.
What's that?
Yeah, Mel was there. And so that is a moment I'll remember because of the insights. We're just giving examples of how these elevation, insight, pride, and connection play out. But let's switch over to something positive. I'm going to go over to pride. So one piece of my time, 15 years of running fitness company after I was teaching high school for 8 years, was when we opened up a bunch of locations. We opened up one where we purchased the building and opened it up, and my son Henry prepared a speech. And I didn't really know he did. I saw him writing down some things, but he wrote down a speech and he got up on a bench. He must have been 6 maybe at this time, and delivered a speech in front of about 100 people that we had gathered for the grand opening. And it's such a feeling of pride that he had the courage to do that. And I was not even listening to the words. I was just more trying to hold it together because it was just feeling the overwhelming sensation of pride. Now, to my earlier point, did everything go perfect about that day? Nope. What do I remember? It's a huge memory in my life because that high, that peak was so high that I'll always remember it. It wasn't that, like, some people said some nice things, like that's expected, but this elevated the situation with a huge moment of pride.
A couple things that are coming to mind for me are, these seem more everyday, but I think it might give you a better perspective on kids. So one example is Everett kept seeing Henry write his name in cursive, and he wanted to do it as well. So I would slowly teach him the different letters, and there was frustration, and you almost forget the frustration because once he actually got it and did it, like the look on the kid's face when they accomplish something that, like, seemingly it might not be a big deal to an adult, but as a 5-year-old, to be able to write your name in cursive is a big deal. And then to be able to go show your brothers, go show daddy, like, it's this exciting, wonderful moment of pride that it makes you want to keep recreating that. So that was one that occurred to me. Another is Logan, and we've talked about this before, but he gets to go to this office and maintain these 3D printers, and other opportunities have arisen from that. And it all stemmed because we went to my youngest son's friend's house, and the dad was home, and he happened to kick off a conversation with Logan and realized that Logan knows so much about 3D printers and different objects that were in this guy's office that the average person has no idea what they are. And he was so impressed that he provided Logan this opportunity to go essentially volunteer at his office. The pride moment, though, is the fact that the dad saw that in Logan, and then this is almost insight as well. I wanted Logan to see, you had this opportunity because of all the work you put in. And as much time as that took, or how much frustration that took, you have taught yourself this, that now allotted this opportunity for you. And I think that is a moment I won't forget. And I try to sometimes the moment will happen and it'll go over certain people's heads. So I try to, like, tell the kids that this moment is something you should remember, or at least recognize the power of it. But that was a proud moment for me as a mother, and I think for Logan that'll be, like, foundational for him as well.
All right, last one, building connection. Some examples of that, and then we'll get into how we think in moments with our families. So building connection. I have an example. This is wedding baptisms for my notes, wedding, graduations, baptisms, my book notes. I'll give another example because it happened again recently in Orlando. There might be some recency bias in here, but I think I'll remember this. So I said that a friend, Mark, came and gave a very quality speech. Now, typically at a seminar, someone gives a speech and they do a little question and answer at the end. But what I thought the organizer, Vince, did, which was brilliant, instead of giving Mark Q&A, he had people write down their biggest takeaway from Mark's presentation. Then we went around the room. People stood up and said, "Thank you, Mark, for sharing this insight." So he left knowing that he impacted the people in the room, because part of Mark's mission statement was to spread this feeling of adventure in other lives. And he's got it up on his wall because he knows he's very grounded, knows what his life stands for. Not doing it justice, but I knew it was important to Mark that he knows that he helped spread this message that's in, that he views as critical. And so instead of a Q&A, we got stood up. Hey, here's my biggest takeaway. He had left with dozens of people sharing their biggest takeaway. And what is even more powerful about building that connection is that Mark brought his son Joseph to it. And Joseph got to sit there during Mark's presentation and then listen to all these successful people in business stand up and say how impactful his father was. The goal was to create a moment or a memory for the pair of them to share. And Vince did a brilliant job elevating it by having this takeaways session instead of a Q&A.
That's so cool. This makes me think of when I had like my bridal shower. One of the things that often happens is you ask everybody who comes to write down a piece of advice for marriage or whatever. And some people will just put things down like never go to bed angry, things you always hear. But to elevate it, you could put something that's more personal. And I don't necessarily remember what those cards said, but I feel like there's an opportunity there. If everybody had stood up and read the card, for example, that would have made more of a connection, I think. Because if someone has to read it to you, it becomes more personal, and the more personal it is, the more of a connection you create. So it's similar to what he did there, where you're providing, what am I going to give you as advice? That wasn't advice, but this particular example was advice, but some kind of a takeaway that you can take moving forward. And a connection, like what if someone said something and then it sparked something else, and then they later on, let's say I remember this person reading this advice to me, and then I could turn to them in the future because I had that memory from them, it being read to me. That can create connection even decades later. It's kind of exciting.
How you like that?
I like that very much.
Let's spend the last 5 minutes here on the podcast giving you some brainstorming ideas on how you can apply all this that we just talked about in family life. So the first thing is you need to spot moments that are worthy of investment. Look at your calendar now. What big events are coming up? We are around the season where kids will be graduating a certain grade. Is there something special that you can do for that graduation to elevate the moment? Something special with their schoolwork, something special with how far they came from day one to the last day of graduation, something that they accomplished that impacted you. Like, how can you use those 4 attributes to elevate something like a graduation, a birthday? Summer's coming to spring, summer when we're recording this. Is there vacation coming up? What are the moments that on your calendar already that you can invest a little bit more time to brainstorm an idea like the Vince takeaway idea, or just switching it up and doing a challenge or an experience like we talked about with the birthday ideas? So start identifying these in the calendars. It will really come down to your family core values, so I just can't tell you what to do, but I'm sharing with you the outcome that you want, which is a powerful moment that is a milestone in their life using one of those 4 methods.
Spring break is coming up for us, and I'm sure it is for the majority of people out there listening. Let's say you have a vacation planned, or even if you're going to be staying home, maybe you could include, if you participate in doing the family meetings, maybe that could be a discussion topic that you try to elevate the kids to. We want to do something exciting this week, and maybe they have ideas as well. Maybe it's doing a hike that, like, we always think about hiking because around here there's so many opportunities for that. But maybe they even could brainstorm an idea that makes that spring break more memorable, because that's coming up very soon.
The next thing you want to keep your eye out for, and this is something that you won't necessarily be able to pre-plan all that far, are not just the peaks, but those pits or those troughs, and how can you turn that into a powerful moment? These are things like loss of a loved one, loss of a family pet, even just dealing with negative feelings, negative situations. There are lessons that we as parents have a unique approach to be able to impact our kids by teaching them lessons. We often remember our parents taught us this lesson through saying this thing. I remember some of the things my father said to me, and they weren't usually during like moments of great accomplishment. It was just the opposite when you're down and you need to pick me up. So what are those pits? What are those lessons? Like, I have lessons around, like, I will always remember my younger brother because he was home when the state troopers came to give him the news that our father had died, that he called me and all he could say was, Dad's dead. And I remember getting that phone call and how I was able to react to it and get over there and respond and help organize us to get to the family, the people that I'm thankful for that helped me along the way to get to who I need to the funeral and all this stuff. There was lessons in that and how to deal with an acutely negative hit and still be able to turn it into an opportunity to serve others. And I can share that with the kids.
That really is a chosen mindset to try to always find lessons. I love, and I've said this before, I love the idea of always looking out for opportunities. And sometimes we have to be careful of when to provide the lesson. Because sometimes in the moment, your kid might not be ready to hear. If they're busy complaining to you about what happened at recess, and all I want to do is be like, but here's the silver lining. Sometimes they're not ready yet to hear that. So you got to hold on to it. I had another idea. Oh, you started this with Henry after soccer games. So he gets really down on himself after a game, especially if they lose or if he didn't feel like he performed his best, and he can really have some negative self-talk. But you ask him 3 questions, I don't know if you remember what they were, after every game, that kind of resets his mind, like what went well, what could you have done better, or I don't remember what they were exactly, but you specifically thought ahead of time to ask him those questions after each game, almost to get him out of that pit that he was going to dig even deeper,
Yep.
and try to pull away a lesson from that game.
Yep. Trying to say, oh, how'd it go?
Yeah.
No, what are some areas of improvement? What'd you learn? And we did an episode on that as well in season 1. We got a lot in that season 1. I know we have so many new listeners. Don't forget to go back and listen to all the work done in season 1. Hopefully we speak a little bit better than we did. A little choppy at the beginning, but they've been flowing well. Let's get to the last point of this. How do we create moments of elevation? So we talked about the pits, but how do we create something that's bigger and more exciting? We can redesign moments to make them more memorable in terms of elevation. Looking at these opportunities, these birthdays coming up, like what's something special that you can do? It doesn't necessarily have to be a huge gift, but it could be a personal gift. It could be gift. I've seen families gift children something of the previous generations at a certain age. Hey, this was grandpa's watch or whatever it was. They'll always remember that gift. They're not going to remember necessarily like the pairs of shoes and a t-shirt. But that's a way to elevate it to something different by building relationship and connection. Other ways to elevate is just do something that you wouldn't normally do. Okay, we don't go to concerts. Let's go to this concert this one time. Let's go to this one place that the kids always ask to go to. You always say no. Like they'll remember the time that you did. If you always go, it'll blur into the background.
To highlight something you said earlier that feeds right into this is if you have your core values set up, it makes it so much easier to think of how to elevate things. So one of our core values is it's personal development. And a lot of that has to do with us trying to be healthy people. And for Christmas one year, when we had our Christmas cookies, you went and hid them up on the mountain and the kids had to climb up to go get them. So another one of our values is being adventurous. And the kids will never forget that. They mention it every year. I think that was 2 Christmases ago. They mention it every year. They actually mention it in passing sometimes when something comes up with cookies or whatever. And that just elevated that, just that little bit extra. But I think the reason that you thought to do that was based on our values of being adventurous, of being, have personal development, and even accountability to your own health. So that stands out in my mind. And I think if you have your value, my whole point here is if you have your core values developed, which you could start with right now, it does make it a lot easier to then ask yourself, how can we elevate it? Even if it's on a vacation. If you're going to go on a vacation, take a look at your values. What could you do that's different on a vacation that really highlights one of your core values?
All right, let's share our biggest takeaways. Now I'll go first so you can think on it for a second. But here's what I want you to leave this episode with. Life is a blur. We often say how fast time travels. The solution to that is to create milestones or memories so that it gives you a period of time that seems like life slowed down. If you do the same thing every day, it all blurs together, and that first statement becomes true, but you have the power to fix it. Put some intention into creating moments. Don't try to get them like all equally good. Have one powerful piece of it. We're talking birthdays and stuff like that. You don't have to make like the cake a little bit better or whatever food just a little bit better. Have one thing powerfully happen. They're more likely to remember it than an average of the experience. And also when it comes to pits, there will be negative things that happen in life. If you start looking at it through the lens, how do I make this a memory for my kids to help push them forward? Maybe it's through insight. Maybe it's through creating some pride in them working through a difficult time with your support. those moments are powerful. They're just not going to happen. Make sure you plan ahead. Make sure you use the lessons in today's podcast to try to create a moment, and then you'll see how powerful it is. And I think you'll get addicted to thinking about life and the power of moments.
To do, I think that I'm going to actually do right when we finish this, and I encourage you to do, is to actually look at your calendar. Is there a birthday coming up? Is there a spring break trip? Or just if you're staying home, is there something that's going to be in the next couple of weeks that you can add something exciting to? And the other thing I was going to say is sometimes it's helpful to look back and say, what would have made one of my birthdays as a kid more elevated? My parents, they let us have a party when we were 13 and 16. And I still remember that. And not saying you shouldn't have something every year, but I remember those 2 birthdays because they were special and they stood out. So if you can look back, sometimes it's very helpful to reflect back to when you were a kid and ask yourself, what would have elevated that birthday or that holiday or that vacation to the next level? And then you can do that with your family.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Strong Family Project podcast. Make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends if you find it valuable, and we'll continue powering through with season 2 episodes every Thursday. Talk to you soon.